Okay. So I spent 11 years in academia as a sex researcher, and I still have absolutely no idea why anyone thinks there are 71 different genders. Let me get one thing out of the way. Gender is binary, and it is not a social construct. That should really be the end of my talk today. But as I'm sure you know, by virtue of being here, we are drowning in misinformation on this subject. Biological sex is either male or female, based on our reproductive functions. Gender, on the other hand, is how we feel, whether we feel masculine or feminine, in relation to our biological sex. When sperm fertilizes an egg at conception, the baby will be either female or male, and biology will dictate hormonal exposure in utero and the child's resulting gender identity as well. For over 99% of us, our biological sex is our gender identity. So if we want to talk about things from a scientific perspective, there are only two sexes, and there are only two genders. To suggest otherwise is not scientifically accurate. I first started writing about the issue of gender because mainstream media's coverage of it frankly terrifies me. From my time in academia, I can tell you there's a long list of areas of research that are forbidden, and this is affecting what the public is and isn't allowed to know. Bill C-16 has contributed to this climate by writing false and unscientific ideas about gender into federal law. Nowadays, self-determination is everything, and some people will stop at nothing to push this agenda. They will torture logic and tokenize certain groups in order to gain political ground, like pointing to people with a difference of sex development, which is a medical condition previously known as intersex, as proof that gender is a spectrum. But this isn't accurate because people with a difference of sex development, who make up roughly 1% of the population, possess anatomy characteristic of both sexes. For example, a child may be born with a vulva as well as testicular tissue. This is due to differences in genetics and hormonal exposure in the womb. So even in these cases, biology is still dictating someone's sense of gender. There are thousands of studies showing the effects of prenatal testosterone on the developing brain. Even before birth, exposure to testosterone changes the way in which male and female brains grow. There's no way that behavioral differences we see between men and women are purely due to socialization, unless someone wants to argue that the unborn child is capable of learning gendered stereotypes while they are still in the womb. The bottom line is, environment plays a role in shaping us, but it can't override biology. People supporting the idea that gender is a social construct will often say that science backs up their views. And the next time you encounter someone like this, I suggest you ask them, what science are they referring to? If they're able to come up with anything, they'll probably point to a study that came out a few years ago claiming that male and female brains exist along a mosaic and aren't actually any different from one another. But a group of my colleagues reanalyzed the exact same brain data from that study and found that you could, in fact, tell a male brain from a female brain at a rate much higher than chance. What's disappointing is that the media promoted the first study to no end because its findings were flashy and politically correct. But they refused to cover the second study because apparently being scientifically accurate isn't as lucrative. It isn't sexist to talk about sex differences. What's sexist is assuming that women need to be identical to men in order to be worthy of equal treatment. Defending biology nowadays gets you called not only alt-right and misogynistic, but a transphobic bigot too. And so this brings me to the hate speech part of my talk. People can identify however they like, but none of these identity labels are based in any science at all. That goes for being gender non-binary, gender neutral, agender, bigender, pangender, gender fluid, gender free, or moon gender, just to name a few. Just wait. All of these labels mean that you identify, to some extent, as either both genders or neither. Moon gender, I've learned, means your gender only comes out at night. And I'm not making it up, I swear. The reality is, no one is 100% male or female typical. Think of the average guy. He's probably into a bunch of things that guys like, but he probably has some female typical traits too, and there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe he likes watching sports, but he also likes talking on the phone. And before... I see that you guys are laughing, but if anyone gets upset when this is on the internet, these are gender traits commonly used in the field of social psychology, so you can't call me a sexist for using them as examples. In my case, I'm a woman who loves watching mixed martial arts, which is a sport that has mostly male fans. So I spend a lot of time asking myself, am I really both genders, or gender neutral, or neither? Or does it just mean that I'm a woman that likes watching a male-dominated sport? No one espousing this gender nonsense seems to have really thought it through, though, because from a practical standpoint, to say that you are both genders or neither still depends, by definition, on the concept of gender being binary. Some people might say, okay, so it's just kids on Tumblr having fun. Why, Debra, do you have to go and rain on their parade? Well, I say it has implications for the rest of us. When we look at the education system, the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario teaches children that gender is not binary. As I wrote in the Globe and Mail on Monday, Ontario's most recent sex ed curriculum taught children that gender is a social construct, the result of traditional gender norms, and that some people are both genders or don't have one. The other day, someone sent me guidelines from a school board a few hours from here. Their sex ed curriculum teaches kids about puberty, as it should, but it refers to children as people with a penis and people with a vagina, instead of simply calling them boys and girls. As I mentioned earlier, for 99% of us, our biological sex is our gender. Less than 1% of the adult population identifies as transgender, a number that has doubled in the last 10 years. So to rewrite children's education as though it's commonplace for a person to identify as the opposite sex is inaccurate, potentially confusing to them, and irresponsible. Planned Parenthood in Ottawa recently tweeted that anatomy isn't male or female, it just is. And that it's transphobic to believe otherwise. They also warn that the adults in the room may not get it, and it's a child's job to re-educate them. Pediatricians will also have an interesting perspective going forward. The Canadian Pediatric Society released a guideline a few months ago that was meant to help doctors and parents understand the concept of gender. Among its recommendations, doctors were told that gender is a spectrum, that gender identity and gender expression are unrelated, and a child's sex is assigned at birth. And finally, while attending a research talk at a university a few months ago, one of the presenters actually showed slides of both the gender-bred person and the gender unicorn. For those of you who may have been fortunate enough to not be exposed to either of these atrocities, there are cartoons that were made for the purpose of teaching children that there are more genders than male and female, that gender identity has nothing to do with gender expression, anatomy, or sexual orientation. So where does that leave us? More and more people don't know what the truth is. The fact that these gender fantasies are being taught as part of the education curriculum means that young children are growing up with a distorted worldview. I find it really unsettling that many parents who know better seem to be okay with this because they'd rather be seen as progressive than dare to rock the boat. Another side effect is that clinicians who work with children aren't able to do their job. We only have to look at the rapidly multiplying number of young children who are identifying as transgender to see the social contagion aspect of this way of thinking. Many of these kids have some other medical condition that is leading them to feel the way that they do, whether it's autism, borderline personality disorder, or trauma. But because of the current political climate, along with laws like Bill 77 that incorrectly conflate any kind of questioning of gender identity with conversion therapy, therapists and doctors are too afraid to push back because they could lose their livelihood for doing so. I've written previously about my experience growing up as a straight woman in the gay community, and what I find most disturbing is that with this movement, gay children are being encouraged to transition so that they appear heterosexual. If you take the example of a little boy who is feminine, who tells his parents that he's a girl, when he grows up, he's likely going to be a gay man. If you take that same little boy and allow him to transition to female, when he grows up, he's going to look like he's a straight woman. Let me be clear, I believe that transgender adults, people with a difference of sex development, and those who are gender non-conforming deserve dignity, respect, and equal rights. I believe that gender dysphoria is a real phenomenon, and those who are suffering should be free to live their lives as they choose, including pursuing a social and medical transition in adulthood if they decide to. My issue is that the way we talk about biology and gender should not be maligned in order to facilitate these rights. Children should not be used as pawns to further this agenda. Scientists should be able to do their work without interference. They shouldn't have to waste their time debating facts as obvious as how many genders there are. What I find most frustrating about Bill C-16 is it doesn't even achieve what it presumably set out to do, which is increase societal acceptance for people who don't fit our expectations around gender norms. The ideology promoted by Bill C-16 only fosters resentment, shuts down meaningful discussion, and impairs our ability to understand what it means to be human. Thank you.